Lady Sarah's story is both remarkable and filled with unexpected twists. And you won't believe how Diana's closest ally may have played an unintentional role in her sister's tragic death.
What if the truth about Princess Diana was far more heartbreaking than anyone imagined? For years, the world saw her as a beloved royal. But behind the scenes, she endured betrayal, isolation, and relentless pressure. Now her sister, Sarah Spencer, has revealed shocking details that change everything. What did Sarah witness behind palace walls? How did Diana's struggles reshape the monarchy? Could her fate have been different if she had received real support? Princess Diana's life was shaped long before she became a royal, within the walls of Althorp House, where the Spencer family had lived for over 5 centuries. The grand estate, surrounded by vast fields and towering trees, was home to a family deeply embedded in British aristocracy. But beyond its elegance, the Spencer household carried its own struggles, shaping the childhood of the young girl who would one day become the world's most famous princess. Diana Frances Spencer was born on the 1st of July, 1961, the 4th of 5 children. Her arrival came just a year after the tragic loss of her infant brother John, a grief that lingered within the family. Her parents, John Spencer, Viscount Althorp, and Frances Shand Kidd, had a turbulent marriage, often strained by pressures of nobility and expectations. By the time Diana was just 7 years old, the household she knew fell apart. The divorce of her parents in 1969 left an emotional mark on her, and she was placed under the guardianship of her father, John Spencer, who eventually inherited the title of Earl Spencer. Amidst these changes, Diana's eldest sister, Sarah Spencer, took on a significant role in the household. 6 years older than Diana, Sarah was independent and outspoken, qualities that would later set her apart. She witnessed the complexities of her family life firsthand, understanding the rigid structures imposed upon them as aristocrats. Unlike Diana, who was still a child navigating the changes in their family, Sarah was already forging her own path, stepping into high society events and making connections that would later alter the course of history. It was in the summer of 1977 when Sarah's life took an unexpected turn. She had been invited to a pheasant hunt, a social event among Britain's elite, where she met Prince Charles, the heir to the throne. At the time, Charles was under growing pressure to find a suitable wife. The royal family, particularly Queen Elizabeth II and Prince Philip, sought a woman of noble background who could seamlessly adapt to royal duties. Sarah, as the daughter of an earl, seemed like a potential match. Their relationship quickly became a subject of interest among the press. Charles, then 29 years old, found Sarah's confidence intriguing. She was well-spoken, independent, and unafraid to challenge him in conversations. They shared interests in the arts and environmental conservation, and for a brief period, their courtship seemed promising. However, Sarah was not one to conform to expectations, especially those dictated by the royal family. She had little interest in the restrictions that came with being a future queen, and her candid nature would soon bring an abrupt end to the relationship. In an interview with reporters, Sarah made a bold statement that shocked many. When asked about her relationship with Charles, she responded, "I wouldn't marry Charles if he were the dustman or the King of England." Her words sent ripples through royal circles, signaling to Charles and his family that she was not interested in pursuing a future with him. The romance quickly faded, but Sarah's involvement with Charles would have lasting consequences. Through Sarah's brief relationship with Charles, an introduction was made, one that would change the course of Diana's life forever. Diana, then just 16 years old, first met Charles during a visit to Althorp House. To her, he was simply her sister's acquaintance, a charismatic royal figure who moved in circles far beyond her own. She later recalled the encounter, describing him as a very jolly, amusing, and attractive man. At the time, neither could have imagined that within just a few years, their lives would become forever intertwined. Following her separation from Charles, Sarah moved on, but the connection between the Spencers and the royal family remained. Charles continued to attend events where he occasionally crossed paths with Diana, though initially, he saw her as nothing more than Sarah's younger sister. Meanwhile, Diana's life was evolving in its own way. She attended a finishing school in Switzerland before moving to London, where she shared a flat with friends and took up work as a nanny and kindergarten assistant. It was a period of independence, a time when she lived freely, away from the obligations that would soon consume her life. By 1980, Diana's world took a dramatic turn. At a summer gathering hosted by mutual friends, she and Charles reconnected. Unlike their earlier meetings, this time, Charles saw something different in Diana. She was no longer the 16-year-old girl he had once met at Althorpe. She was now a poised young woman, kind, soft-spoken, and untainted by past relationships. The qualities that made Sarah unsuitable for royal life made Diana seem like the perfect choice. Charles, under mounting pressure from his family to settle down, began pursuing Diana more seriously. She was invited to Balmoral, the royal family's private estate in Scotland, where she was introduced to Queen Elizabeth II, Prince Philip, and the rest of the family. The visit was seen as a test, one that Diana unknowingly passed with ease. The Queen and Prince Philip found her charming, and she appeared to fit the mold of what they had envisioned for the future wife of the Prince of Wales. By the end of 1980, their relationship had gained public attention. The press followed Diana's every move, eager to capture details of the young woman who had seemingly won the heart of the future king. Her private life, once untouched by media scrutiny, was now front-page news. The intense attention was something she had never experienced before, but it was only the beginning. Then, in February 1981, Charles proposed. The moment was meant to be one of joy, but it was marked by a sense of unease. Diana, caught up in the whirlwind of royal expectations, accepted. During their televised engagement interview, when asked if they were in love, Diana responded with enthusiasm, saying, "Of course." But Charles' response was unsettling. He merely said, "Whatever in love means." The words, spoken so casually, would later haunt Diana, foreshadowing the emotional distance that would define their marriage. Despite the underlying doubts, preparations for the royal wedding moved forward at full speed. The event was set to be one of the most grandiose spectacles in British history. Diana, at just 19 years old, was about to step into a life that she was unprepared for, one that would demand everything from her. What she didn't know was that, hidden beneath the glamour, lay a world of expectations, constraints, and betrayals that would soon unravel before her eyes. The grand spectacle of Diana and Charles's wedding on 29 July 1981 was unlike anything the world had ever seen. Millions tuned in to witness what appeared to be the perfect royal union. The bride, dressed in an ivory silk gown with a 25-foot train, radiated elegance as she walked down the aisle of St. Paul's Cathedral. The ceremony was grand, the celebrations extravagant, and the monarchy had its future queen. But behind the carefully crafted fairy tale, Diana was already struggling with the weight of her new life. From the moment she entered the royal family, Diana felt an overwhelming sense of isolation. Buckingham Palace, though magnificent in stature, felt cold and unwelcoming. She had gone from living a relatively independent life in London to being under constant surveillance, with strict rules governing her every move. The transition was suffocating. The expectations placed upon her were immense. She was to embody grace, poise, and unwavering loyalty to the crown, all while adapting to the rigid protocols of royal life. Charles, preoccupied with his own royal duties, was often emotionally unavailable. He had spent years being shaped by tradition, his upbringing instilling in him a sense of duty that left little room for emotional expression. Diana, on the other hand, was expressive, warm, and eager for a loving partnership. The distance between them grew, and it became evident that their relationship lacked the deep emotional connection she had hoped for. What made matters worse was the presence of Camilla Parker Bowles. Diana had sensed early on that Charles's heart had never fully belonged to her. Just before their wedding, she discovered a bracelet that Charles had custom-made for Camilla, engraved with the initials F and G for Fred and Gladys, the nicknames they used for each other. It was a painful realization. one that foreshadowed the struggles that lay ahead. Sarah, watching from the sidelines, saw the toll it was taking on her sister. Though their relationship had always been strong, Diana was becoming more guarded, hesitant to share the full extent of her unhappiness. But the signs were there. Diana's once lively spirit seemed dimmed by the pressures of royal life, and Sarah worried about how much longer she could endure it. Despite her personal struggles, Diana quickly became a public sensation. The media adored her, and the public was captivated by her charm and relatability. She was not like the royals of the past. She was genuine, approachable, and deeply compassionate. Her ability to connect with people, regardless of status, made her an instant favorite. But with that admiration came an intense level of scrutiny. The press followed her every move, dissecting her fashion choices, her gestures, and even her body language. Every moment of her life was captured on camera, and the expectations of perfection became impossible to meet. This constant pressure contributed to a battle that she fought in silence, her struggle with bulimia. Diana later spoke openly about how the eating disorder began during her engagement. The stress, the overwhelming attention, and her feelings of inadequacy led her to develop an unhealthy relationship with food. It became a coping mechanism, a way to regain control in a world where she had none. But in those early years, few knew the extent of her suffering. By 1982, Diana found solace in one aspect of her life: motherhood. On 21st June, she gave birth to Prince William, a moment she later described as one of the happiest of her life. Holding her son in her arms, she felt a love so profound that for a brief moment, it overshadowed everything else. William became her anchor, giving her a sense of purpose beyond the expectations of her royal title. 2 years later, on 15 September 1984, she welcomed her second son, Prince Harry. Diana adored her children, and she was determined to give them as normal a childhood as possible. Unlike previous generations of royals, who had maintained a formal distance from their children, Diana was hands-on, present, and deeply affectionate. She took them to amusement parks, let them wear casual clothes, and shielded them from the rigid formalities of palace life whenever she could. Charles, however, struggled with Diana's approach to motherhood. He had been raised with strict discipline, and the idea of breaking royal traditions did not sit well with him. The differences in their parenting styles became another point of contention, widening the divide between them. As the years went on, the strain in their marriage became undeniable. Diana, feeling increasingly isolated, found solace in keeping a personal diary. In its pages, she poured out her deepest fears, frustrations, and heartbreaks. It was the one place where she could be completely honest, free from the watchful eyes of the media and the constraints of royal expectations. Sarah, who remained close to Diana, saw how much she relied on this private form of expression. Though Diana rarely spoke openly about her pain, Sarah could see it in her sister's eyes. The loneliness, the emotional neglect, and the weight of the world resting on her shoulders. It was all too much. The public, still enamored with the image of the fairy tale princess, had no idea what was happening behind closed doors. To them, Diana was a radiant royal, the mother of 2 young princes, and the beloved wife of the future king. But beneath the surface, she was crumbling. By the late 1980s, the fractures in Diana and Charles's marriage were becoming harder to hide. Their public appearances were filled with forced smiles and scripted gestures, but those closest to them knew the truth. The love that once seemed promising had faded, replaced by resentment and emotional detachment. Sarah, who had experienced a brief relationship with Charles years before, understood the struggles of being close to the future king. She had once walked away from a life that required complete submission to royal expectations, knowing that it was not something she was willing to endure. But Diana had not been given that choice. She had been swept into the royal machine, and now it was consuming her. Diana's growing unhappiness did not go unnoticed by the media. By the early 1990s, rumors of trouble in the marriage were circulating. though the full extent of their issues was still unknown to the public. But soon, the world would learn just how broken their relationship truly was. Diana's struggles within the confines of royal life were no longer just personal battles. They were becoming increasingly public. By the early 1990s, the illusion of a perfect marriage had begun to crumble, and the once fairy tale romance was now a subject of relentless media speculation. The distance between Diana and Charles was no longer hidden behind palace walls, and their strained interactions at official events were analyzed by the press with growing intensity. As the world watched, Diana continued to suffer in silence. She had devoted herself to her role as a mother, ensuring that William and Harry had as normal a childhood as possible. But beyond that, she felt lost. She had long struggled to fit into a system that demanded quiet obedience, a system that had left her feeling abandoned. Charles, meanwhile, had resumed his closeness with Camilla Parker Bowles, a relationship that had never truly ended despite his marriage to Diana. The betrayal, once just a suspicion, was now painfully clear. Sarah, who had always played the role of the protective elder sister, saw what was happening. Though Diana was careful in what she shared, Sarah could tell that she was reaching a breaking point. The weight of royal expectations, combined with the emotional void in her marriage, was pushing her further into isolation. But as much as Sarah wanted to help, there was little she could do. The monarchy operated in its own world, and Diana was trapped within it. Then came the moment that changed everything. In January 1993, private phone conversations between Charles and Camilla from 4 years earlier were leaked to the press. The recordings, later dubbed the Camillagate scandal, confirmed what many had already suspected, that Charles had been unfaithful throughout his marriage. The most infamous part of the conversation, where Charles jokingly suggested he wished to live inside Camilla's trousers, even as a tampon, sent shockwaves through the public. The monarchy was thrown into crisis, and for Diana, the betrayal was no longer something she had to suffer in private. The revelation did more than confirm Charles's infidelity. It humiliated Diana on a global scale. While the press had once portrayed her as the beloved people's princess, she was now cast as the wronged wife, the victim of a marriage that had been doomed from the start. The public rallied around her, offering sympathy and support, but inside the palace, she remained an outsider. The royal family, deeply invested in preserving their image, treated the scandal as a personal failing rather than a consequence of their own rigid traditions. Sarah watched as Diana navigated this public storm, witnessing both her resilience and her pain. Though Diana had always been strong, this scandal had stripped away whatever remained of her belief in the institution she had married into. She was no longer willing to play the role expected of her, no longer willing to pretend. Her next move shocked the world. In November 1995, Diana sat down for an unprecedented interview with the BBC's Panorama program. For the first time, she spoke candidly about her life behind palace walls. With composure and grace, she addressed the struggles she had faced, from her battle with bulimia to the emotional neglect in her marriage. And then, in a moment that would define the interview, she uttered the words that left the monarchy reeling. "There were 3 of us in this marriage, so it was a bit crowded." The admission was a direct acknowledgement of Charles's affair with Camilla, something that had long been whispered about, but never confirmed by a member of the royal family. In doing so, Diana shattered the royal family's tradition of silence. She had broken one of their most sacred rules: never speak about internal affairs to the press. The backlash was immediate. The palace was furious, viewing Diana's actions as a betrayal of the monarchy itself. But to the public, she was a woman who had been wronged, finally speaking her truth. The interview was watched by millions, cementing Diana's place as more than just a royal figure. She was now a symbol of defiance, of someone who had dared to challenge an institution that had tried to silence her. Sarah, though initially shocked by Diana's decision to speak so openly, understood why she had done it. Her sister had spent years being controlled, her emotions dismissed, her voice ignored. Now she was reclaiming her narrative. It was a moment of power, but it was also a moment that signaled the end of any remaining ties Diana had to the royal family. In response to the interview, the Queen took an unprecedented step. In December 1995, she wrote to both Diana and Charles, advising them to seek a divorce. The request was not phrased as a suggestion, it was a clear instruction. The monarchy could not withstand another scandal of this magnitude, and Diana's continued presence within the royal structure was now seen as a liability. For Diana, the letter marked the inevitable. The marriage had been broken for years, and now it was time to make it official. Negotiations for the divorce began almost immediately, and though the process was drawn out by August 1996, it was finalized. Diana was no longer the Princess of Wales in title, though she remained the mother of the future king. She had fought to maintain her place within the royal family for the sake of her children, but in the end, she had chosen freedom over obligation. The divorce was a turning point, but it did not bring Diana the peace she had hoped for. Though she was no longer bound by royal rules, she remained a subject of global fascination. The media's obsession with her only grew, and the paparazzi followed her relentlessly, capturing every move she made. Sarah, relieved that her sister had finally broken free from a marriage that had caused her so much pain, still worried about what came next. Diana was stepping into uncharted territory, forging a new life outside of the institution that had defined her for over a decade. She was more independent than ever, but she was also more vulnerable. Diana, now free from the constraints of royal duty, dedicated herself to humanitarian work. She had always been passionate about charity, but now she could choose her own causes without the limitations of palace protocol. She traveled extensively, working with AIDS patients, advocating for mental health awareness, and famously walking through a minefield in Angola to raise awareness for landmine victims. It was during this period that she entered into a relationship with Dodi Fayed, the son of billionaire Mohammed Al Fayed. Their romance, heavily scrutinized by the press, became yet another story for the tabloids. Diana was no longer a princess, but she was still one of the most famous women in the world, and every aspect of her life remained under public scrutiny. Sarah saw the headlines, the speculation, the never-ending pursuit of Diana by photographers. The world may have celebrated her newfound freedom, but the reality was that Diana was still trapped, this time by the relentless gaze of the media. Then, on the night of 31st August 1997, everything changed. The streets of Paris were quiet in the early hours of 31st August 1997, but inside the Ritz Hotel, chaos was unfolding. Diana and Dodi Fayed had spent the evening there, attempting to enjoy their time together away from the relentless pursuit of photographers. But the press had followed them all day, their presence impossible to escape. Around midnight, the couple decided to leave the hotel and return to Dodi's apartment. Security staff, aware of the media frenzy outside, devised a plan. A decoy car was sent to the front entrance while Diana, Dodi, their driver Henry Paul, and bodyguard Trevor Rees-Jones exited through the rear. They entered a black Mercedes, hoping to evade the photographers waiting to capture their every move. But the plan failed. Paparazzi on motorcycles quickly picked up their trail, chasing them through the dimly lit streets of Paris. Henry Paul, who was later found to have alcohol and prescription drugs in his system, drove at high speed in an attempt to outrun the photographers. As the car approached the Pont de l'Alma tunnel, it was moving dangerously fast. At approximately 12:40 a.m., the Mercedes struck a pillar at high impact. The force of the crash was catastrophic. Dodi Fayed and Henry Paul were killed instantly. Trevor Rees-Jones, the only one wearing a seatbelt, survived but suffered severe injuries. Diana, still alive, was critically injured. Emergency responders arrived quickly, working to stabilize her as they transported her to the Pitié-Salpêtrière hospital. The damage was extensive. She had suffered massive internal bleeding. Despite hours of efforts by medical staff, she was pronounced dead at 4 a.m. The news spread rapidly, and by morning, the world was in shock. How could someone so full of life, so beloved, be gone in an instant? Tributes poured in from every corner of the globe. In London, thousands of mourners gathered outside Kensington Palace, laying flowers, lighting candles, and leaving heartfelt messages. The grief was palpable, unlike anything the country had seen in modern history. Sarah, upon hearing the news, was devastated. Though she had always feared for Diana's safety, she never imagined it would end like this. The shock of losing her sister in such a tragic and public manner was overwhelming. Alongside her family, she flew to Paris to bring Diana home. On the 6th of September 1997, Diana's funeral took place at Westminster Abbey. The event was broadcast worldwide, watched by over 2 billion people. The sight of her young sons, William and Harry, walking behind her coffin as it made its way through the streets of London left an unforgettable mark on those who witnessed it. Sarah, along with their other sister Jane, walked in the funeral procession, supporting their family through the unimaginable grief. As Elton John performed "Candle in the Wind," rewritten in Diana's honor, the world mourned the loss of a woman whose kindness and compassion had transcended the rigid expectations of royalty. But amid the sorrow, questions remained. Could Diana's death have been prevented? Did the intense media pressure contribute to the events of that fateful night? The speculation surrounding her final hours only fueled the public's demand for answers. Sarah, like the rest of the Spencer family, had no interest in engaging with the conspiracy theories that soon followed. Her focus was on preserving Diana's legacy, ensuring that she was remembered not just for the tragedy of her death, but for the extraordinary life she had lived. Diana had left behind a legacy of compassion and strength, one that her sons would carry forward. Her work in humanitarian causes had changed perceptions and challenged long-standing traditions. She had shown the world that royalty could be more than distant figures on a balcony, that they could be warm, empathetic, and deeply connected to the people they served. But even as the world moved on, Sarah held on to the memories of the sister she had loved and lost. The world had known Diana as a princess, but to Sarah, she would always be the little girl who had once run through the fields of Althorpe, carefree and full of life. In the days following Diana's funeral, the grief that had engulfed the world did not fade quickly. The royal family remained under intense scrutiny, criticized for their initial silence in the wake of her death. The Spencer family, meanwhile, mourned in private, away from the public eye. Sarah, devastated by the loss of her sister, found herself reflecting on the extraordinary yet painful journey Diana had endured. The weight of being a global icon had been immense, and while the world had adored her, it had also demanded more from her than any person could give. As the years passed, Diana's legacy only grew stronger. Her sons, Prince William and Prince Harry, became the living embodiments of her compassion, carrying forward her humanitarian work and challenging traditional royal norms. They spoke openly about their mother's influence, ensuring that her values remained at the heart of their public lives. Sarah remained protective of Diana's memory. While she rarely spoke publicly about her sister, she remained an important presence in the Spencer family's efforts to honor her. Alongside their other sister, Jane, she played a role in maintaining Diana's final resting place at Althorpe, ensuring it remained a place of quiet reflection rather than public spectacle. Despite Diana's absence, her impact on the royal family was undeniable. The institution had been forced to evolve in response to the public's overwhelming support for the woman they had once struggled to embrace. The modern monarchy, with its increased accessibility and focus on charitable work, bore Diana's imprint in ways that could not be ignored. But even as the world moved forward, the questions surrounding Diana's final years never truly faded. The media continued to analyze every aspect of her life, her struggles, and her relationships. The circumstances of her death remained a subject of speculation, fueling books, documentaries, and ongoing debates about the role of the paparazzi in the tragedy. For Sarah, these discussions were painful reminders of the loss she had suffered. Diana had been more than a global figure. She had been a sister, someone with whom she had shared childhood memories, laughter, and quiet moments of understanding. The world had known Diana as a princess, but Sarah had known her simply as family. Over time, Sarah found solace in the knowledge that Diana's life had not been in vain. The causes she had championed, AIDS awareness, mental health advocacy, and the campaign against landmines continued to make an impact. People still spoke of Diana's kindness, her ability to connect with those who felt unseen, and the way she had used her platform to make a difference. Diana's sons carried that same spirit. William, now the Prince of Wales, had become a dedicated advocate for mental health and homelessness, areas his mother had been passionate about. Harry, in his own way, had continued her humanitarian legacy, working on veterans' issues and global charitable efforts. Even as their paths diverged, both remained deeply influenced by their mother's example. Sarah, watching from afar, saw in them the best parts of Diana, the warmth, the empathy, the determination to challenge outdated traditions. She knew that while her sister had been taken too soon, her legacy had not ended. It lived on in her children, in the people she had helped, and in the way she had changed the monarchy forever. For Sarah, Diana's story would never be just a tale of tragedy. It was a story of resilience, of love, and of a woman who had dared to defy expectations in pursuit of something greater. And though the years continued to pass, one thing remained certain. Diana's light had not been extinguished. It continued to shine, just as brightly as ever. With that, we have reached the end of today's video. If you have come this far with us, be sure to check out other videos on the channel.